or sorry, for Wednesday, uh, Wednesday, April 28th to order. And we are still conducting these meetings virtually based on Governor Walz's Peacetime Emergency Executive Order 20-01 in response to COVID-19. And it's not practical or prudent to conduct them in person. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or video conference. The meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D-2-021, the date and time that we've started. We encourage people to monitor the meeting remotely. If you have comments or questions, we encourage members of the public to email us at public.info@met.state.mn.us, and we'll respond to your comments in a timely manner. We have a very full agenda today, so we will try to work our way through it as judiciously as possible. So with that, could we call the roll to see if we have quorum, please?
Barber,
Here.
Gonzalez, Johnson,
Here.
Lee,
Here.
Lilligren, Luce,
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, are there any updates or changes to the agenda? No. All right, seeing none, we will move on to an approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Johnson moves. Second
Is
by
there a
Barber.
second? Moved by Johnson, seconded by Barber. Is there any discussion or comments on the minutes? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have three business items on our agenda today. The first business item is business item 2021-96, the Masterson Personnel Temporary Staffing Services Contract Amendment. Todd?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Todd Rowley. I'm the Director of Talent Management in Human Resources. And I'm here today to authorize the Regional Administrator to enter into a contract amendment with Masterson Staffing Solutions for $720,000. This money will be replenishing money that was spent on temperature takers during the recent and continued pandemic. Our current solution is that the council has since procured automated kiosks that are administering temperatures at different locations throughout the area. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for the presenter? Sorry, the current contract is how much?
Mr. Chair, the current contract is a 5-year contract for $2 million.
So now we're going up to 2.72 million. Is that my understanding that correctly?
Yes, to replenish the funds that we've used. Unforeseen expenses.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions for the presenter? No. All right. Seeing none, can we get a motion to approve business item 2021-96?
Move by Lee.
Moved by Lee. Is there a second?
Second by Barber.
Seconded by Barber. Thank you. Is there any other discussion? All right. Seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you,
The
everyone.
second business item that we have is business item 2021-97, labor agreement with Metropolitan Council Management Association. MANA. Marcy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Yes, MANA or MANA is a group of supervisors and managers, approximately 110 employees who work for regional administration, environmental services, community development, MTS, essentially all of our non-transit employees in those job classes. Their agreement expired on December 31st, 2020. We reached a tentative agreement with them on March 30th, and the membership ratified their agreement on April 19, 2021. The major economic components of the agreement are the pattern that we've established with our other groups in this compensation structure. It's a 2% general increase in year one, a 2% general increase in year two, and a 2.5% general increase in year three. It also includes a 1.5% performance pool for all employees that are in the performance part of the pay range. We do have a couple of language agreements that increase consistency in areas with regard to working out of class pay and bereavement leave, consistency with our transit managers and our non-rep employees. Otherwise, that's the extent of any major changes in the agreement. As part of the Thrive Lens analysis, again, it falls under stewardship as a settlement that is within the financial parameters established by council for managing labor costs. We think it demonstrates efficient management of public resources and also prosperity. The deal represents a fair and reasonable wage settlement and investment in our employees. The proposed action today is authorization for the regional administrator to enter into a labor agreement with MANA effective January 1st, 2021 through December 31st, 2023. Take any questions the group might have.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions for the presenter on business item 2021-97? All right, seeing none, Marcia, just one quick question. So if we sign it now and people get a raise, we go back to January 1st and they just get a raise effective January 1st, if that's the effective date of the agreement?
Yes, Mr. Chair and council members, it varies a little bit contract to contract, but most of our groups, we actually start the pay increases on the first day of the first pay period after the first of the year. And I think that for 2021, I think that's around January 9th, something like that. So they will get retro pay, all of our groups that have these previously effective contract dates.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Any other questions? Can I get a motion to approve business item 2021-97?
Johnson moves.
Moved by Johnson. Is there a second?
Second by Lee.
Moved by Johnson, seconded by Lee. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion carries. Our third business item that we have is business item 2021-101, ratification of emergency declaration number 65 for the purchase of COVID-19 tests. Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. Phil Walljasper, the Acting Deputy Regional Administrator. This business item is asking the Met Council to ratify the emergency declaration for the purchase of COVID-19 tests in the amount of $490,500. So even though over the past year we've been encouraging our employees to seek opportunities through the state to get tested, we felt there was a need to have on-site capability to administer tests quickly, to prevent hotspots, to prevent the impact that it might have with our critical functions So we contracted for purchase of the COVID test. We contracted with a vendor that the state is using. And we've had that in place for quite a while now. We continue to use it. And again, it was intended to not only prevent hotspots and to identify those that may be positive quickly, so we could get them to quarantine pursuant to the guidelines from the state and the federal from CDC. But we also wanted to have targeted groups tested so that we could identify employees that were asymptomatic, because that was a big concern, asymptomatic spread of COVID. And we have had a few of those. So with that, Mr. Chair, again, the request is to ratify the emergency declaration of the COVID-19 test in an amount of $490,500. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the presenter? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And who do we contract for that? Is it Vault? Or is it
Yes,
someone else?
Mr. Chair and committee members, it is Vault, yes.
Is there, I think I had heard somewhere that there was an audit, or I don't know if investigation is the right word, but looking into the contract that the state has with Vault, and one, is that true? And two, does it, what do you know, and how does that impact our relationship?
Mr. Chair, I was not aware of that. I don't know if anyone else on the call has heard that, but I have not heard of that, but I will certainly look into that.
Yeah, I think there's a committee that's investigating it anyways, just because there were some questions as to, there was another provider that was available that at a significantly lower price that we didn't use as a state, a local provider too, not an outside provider. So anyways, I would just be curious as to we should just look at that, and if there's any price rebates or anything else that happens, hopefully we get the same, would get the same treatment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will do that. I'll look into that.
Are there any other questions for the presenter? All right, seeing none, can we get a motion to approve business item 2021-101?
Mr. Chair, this is Ann Bloodhart, General Counsel, jumping in here. It looks like the business item was supposed to have an attachment to it, the actual emergency declaration. I'm not seeing it on the online version, so I'm wanting to make sure that the council members have all been provided with that attachment and have seen it, so that when it goes to the council, it includes that attachment.
Was that emailed out to people? So is it on the link in the business item?
Mr. Chair and committee members, I see that Jody is on with procurement. I'm not sure if she has any response for that, but I'm not quite sure how that was provided. But Jody, if you have anything to add with that.
Typically, the ratifications for the emergency declaration are provided to the council members, so I can go out and grab it and send it to Lori to make sure that you all have that at your disposal to review today.
So General Counsel, do we need to wait?
Well, if somebody had it to pull up right now, just to make sure all of the council members have seen it, the business item does refer to the attached emergency declaration. So I think it would be appropriate if you all at least seen it. I have not, so I'm afraid I can't vouch for it. But if Jody was able to pull it up and share it with you, or Mary, if you have other thoughts on that.
Mr. Chair and council members, I would recommend that we wait if it's not available for you to view now. We can bring it back to the next meeting.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
let me see what item we're on here. Would it be, I mean, I don't know how fast it takes for people to get that document to us, whether a screen share or a link that we could just flip into our emails. We could just postpone this item to the end of the agenda too, if that helps. Otherwise, yeah, we can bring it back another time. And I'm seeing Jody Jacoby says she can get it in a few minutes. So
Okay.
we can take no action and bring this back up later on the agenda without objection.
That makes sense.
Okay, is there any objections to doing that? All right, seeing none, we will table that until later in the agenda. Our first information item that we have is our bonding results for the parks and wastewater refunding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, council members. This is Mark Thompson, Senior Manager of Treasury, and I'm here to update you on our recent bond sale. As you might recall, we sold bonds on 2 different dates in April. We sold some grant anticipation notes for the Southwest Light Rail project, which you heard the results for on your last meeting. Then this past week, on the last Wednesday, we sold the remaining pieces of our bonding. We sold 2 different parks bond series, about $3 million each. That was new debt. And we also sold a $101 million refunding issue for environmental services. And all these bonds that we sold this past week carried our AAA rating from both Moody's and Standard Poor's. It was another good sale date. We continue to take advantage of very low interest rates. All the bond sales occurred within the parameters that were approved by the council. Just a quick recap, we sold 2 different series of park bonds. There was a taxable series and a tax exempt series. Both of these were short 4-year bonds, about $3 million each. And the taxable bonds sold at an interest rate of 0.61%. That was below the expectations of our financial advisor. We were expecting just slightly higher at 0.66%. So that was a great sale. But we also sold $3 million of some tax exempt park bonds. Those came at an interest rate of 0.27%. So extremely low. And that was well below our expectations. We were looking at about 0.5%. So these came well below our expectations. And then the big one, we sold 101 million actually of refunding bonds for environmental services. We refinanced 3 outstanding wastewater bonds from 2012 and 14. We had a very competitive sale. There was 7 bidders. The interest rate on the new refunding bonds came at 1.41%. And these are longer bonds that go out to 2034, but this came very close to our expectations. We were looking at a 139, so they came at a 141. So right on top of where we were expecting them to come. The best thing about the refunding is the savings that we realized over the course of the remaining term of the bonds. This refunding will generate 11.8 million in debt service costs. So that's a huge number. That'll be realized over the term. The average savings is a little over $1 million a year. So that's all good news. Another great sale. So I just wanted to update you on those results, and happy to answer any questions you have.
So I think I know the answer to this, but are there any opportunities to fund things, or, as we look out the next 6 to 12 months sooner than we might otherwise would, to be sure that we can take advantage of the low interest rates that are available?
Well, we don't have any plans to do that. We've got the funding we need in place right now. There's maybe some opportunities early next spring to look at some more refundings. We've got some more bonds that might be callable or are callable in March. So if interest rates stay low, we'll be able to take advantage of those refunding opportunities. But we don't have any plans to issue any more debt over this year.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mark? All right. Seeing none, thank you. Great results. Keep up the good work. I think one of the things that somewhat goes unsaid, but to get those great rates, we have to maintain our stellar credit ratings, and Mark and Marie and the whole team do a great job of providing the rating agencies with the information they need and the presentations that they need to see to be able to keep those ratings at the levels that we'd like to see them at. So thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our second information item that we have is the 2020 Workforce and Affirmative Action Plan reports. I think we have Marcy and Ashanti.
Hello, Mr. Chair, committee members. Can you see me and hear me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay.
There's a red cover or something over your camera.
I got my computer updated yesterday and I don't know why I can't be seen.
There's a little
So-
slide on your, up on top of your laptop. If just look for the little slide.
Yeah, but my laptop's not open at this point.
That's why.
Well, see, I've got this camera on my second screen.
Right, just proceed.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Mr. Chair, council members, I'm here presenting with Ashanti Payne, and together we will share the results of our 2020 workforce data, and then Ashanti will give you a snapshot of the affirmative action plan and the data that was created or that was used from a 2-year period that's different from 2020, and we'll talk a little bit about our results and our actions. So I would just, if you could go to the next slide. So this is for the time period of the calendar year of 2020. And so it's really going to give you a picture of our workforce demographics as well as some of our personnel actions. So the next slide, please. So this gives you a picture of our workforce composition by people of color. And you can see that our total employees for 2020 were 4,269, and this was an as of December 31st. And all of the data points here on this particular slide are an as of date. You can see that since 2015, we have gone from 30.9% of our workforce to 35.5% being people of color, and that for our managers, we went from 15.8% to 19.1% over that period of time. I have up on the top of the screen the American Community Survey that is based on census data about the metropolitan labor market, the civilian labor market, so that you can compare, the total market to the employee base of the Met Council. Now, when OEO does affirmative action, there's a more granularity that's based on particular job classifications and professions. But this is just one snapshot comparison of our data to the workforce. Next slide, please. This slide shows the race and ethnicity by key division at the council, and I pulled back stats from 2014 just to give another look at the movement by division. And so you can see employees of color and managers of color and the percentages of the workforce compared to those years. And you can see that there were increases in all areas over those years, some pretty significant. All right, next slide, please. This particular slide takes the race, ethnicity, and disability of our workforce and compares it to 2015, and then also compares to the metro workforce for each of those race ethnicities. And then you can see that, areas where that are green compare favorably to the metro workforce, and the areas that are pink or yellow or pink or reddish are the ones that compare not so favorably. I will say too that always with the disability information, that is a self-report data point, and we believe that the data point is underrepresents disabled in our workforce, primarily because of the number of people who are in the disability management process with our occupational health unit. Next slide, please. We're moving into workforce composition by gender, and this gives you a feel for, over the years, our change in percentage for women in our organization. You can see too that compared to the metro workforce, we're quite a bit under the workforce for representation of women in our organization. When you look at some of the more operational professions, we don't compare quite as unfavorably. For example, if you take a look at transportation and type professions, or electrician and plumbing and that sort of, those kinds of professions, there doesn't tend to be as many women. But again, this is a full workforce, and it includes the different divisions. Now, if you could go to the next slide, please, you can see then how we look by division. And so you can see, for example, with RA, where you might say that the kinds of jobs in regional administration might be more representative of the total metro workforce. We do better there, but you can see that in ES and Metro Transit that we are underutilized there for women. All right, next slide, please. Vacancies filled. So this is how are we filling vacancies that are, happen at the Met Council. We do, by the way, fill some of these vacancies with internal applicants, but not all by any means. So this gives you a feel for the 358 vacancies that we filled in 2020, far down from years past, as you can imagine why. COVID certainly impacted us there. Of those vacancies filled, 49% were women, and 28% were people of color. 135 of those vacancies were filled internally. Next slide, please. This one talks about more specifically the management vacancies filled and how those were filled. So we had in 2020 42 management vacancies, and 35% of those vacancies were filled with women. That compares to the women in our workforce of 25%. Right now, those vacancies weren't filled just internally, but I wanted to give a benchmark comparison. And then for people of color, our vacancies were filled at 31% of the vacancies, management vacancies, were filled with people of color. When you compare that to our current workforce demographic of 35.5, we're not matching our workforce. Now, again, not all of those vacancies were filled internally, but what we do want to try to do is match our workforce at least, with those, or to better it. And then next slide, please. We want to take a look at separations at the council. And we had a total of 385 separations in 2020, which was down from 514 the year before. Those numbers aren't on this particular slide, but I thought I would, so you can see that we had, quite a bit less in terms of total numbers. But the 40% of our separations were retirements, 154 retirements, and 39.5% were voluntary separations. That was 46, and 20.5% of our separations were involuntary. That was 23. So our turnover was the lowest it's been in several years. But again, I think you can say that that's also because of COVID, people not necessarily wanting to jump off during that uncertain time. However, people were interested in retiring at a greater rate than we had anticipated. If you go to the next slide, please, you'll see that our, this would be really taking a more granular look based on by division about our just separate, taking out the separations that were voluntary or involuntary. So that totaled 69. About almost 30% of those separations were women, while only 25% of our workforce was women. And then of those separations, 129 separations were people of color, and 55.8% compared to only 35.5% people of color in the workforce. So what we're seeing here is quite a swing in, but now I'm looking at this number and I think that number of people of color separations is not correct, because we didn't have 129. Yeah, I'm just realizing that number is not correct, so I'll have to come back with an updated number. Sorry about that. Okay, so those are the slides that I have for you. That just gives you a snapshot. Now we do have a very lengthy report that is posted on MetNet. And there's a lot more narrative there. There's a lot more data there. It talks talks about everything from training and development to our benefits package, to our Fit for Life programming, our workforce development efforts. It disaggregates quite a bit of our data. So if you want a more close and detailed look, I would point you in the direction of MetNet, and I can forward that link on to this committee at another time or after this meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashanti.
Thanks, Marcy, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. I think, and can we move to the next slide, please? I think as we start focusing in on our affirmative action data and plan, it's important to point out how this information and data is different than the information Marcy just shared, and also the ways we look at this data that are different as well. And I think the first thing that I would point out is that the affirmative action data and our data set is over a 2-year period that began in July of 2018, July 1st, and ended June 30th of 2020. And that data will be tracked and monitored over this upcoming 2 years and covered in terms of our progress, successes, or not in the next plan as well. Next slide, please. So also an affirmative action plan consists of these data points. Of course, what we looked like just over that 2-year period, and then covers those personnel activities, those prominent ones that Marcy also covered. So hires, rehires, promotions, and separations. And the information is broken down by EEO job category, which is just a grouping of like functions and responsibilities grouped together, which gives a picture of different levels in the organization, how we look. Next slide, please. Again, these are kind of the components, narrative components that make up the affirmative action plan. And today I'm really focusing in on those that are highlighted in green, and more specifically to provide updates in terms of where we are compared to where we were the last time this information was presented to this committee. So specifically to our efforts in terms of communication of the plan, and making sure both employees, all employees at the council are aware of it, understand it, and understand their role in terms of how to make sure that this plan is not something that just sits on the shelf, and that we can work together towards advancing workforce equity throughout our organization. And also the work that has been done in close partnership and collaboration with HR and OEO, Human Resources, and the Office of Equal Opportunity, and some of the corrective actions, activities and strategies that we're looking at relative to, again, our goal of achieving workforce equity here at the council. And then finally, how will we be reporting, reviewing, evaluating, and using that data to make key decisions along the way? Next slide, please. So both in terms of communication of the plan, both the 2018 and 2020, which is our current plan, are available on the METNet and .org sites. And you can link to them from both of those sites through the Office of Equal Opportunity page and then Affirmative Action Plan. We are currently in the planning stages for 2 and possibly 3, based on the last meeting that we just had, possibly 3 sessions, because we want to make sure that folks that work 3rd shift or that are in the plants and some of our operators can have the opportunity, as well as record those sessions so that they're available if they were not able to attend one of the live information sessions. Next slide, please. So I discussed a little bit, and we will talk specifically about some of those that we have identified, discussed in terms of strategies, best practices, and corrective actions. I mentioned we're working closely in partnership with HR, but that really starts with reviewing what we're already doing and our current strategies and assessing the relevancy and success related to those strategies, and if they should be continued or adjusted. And then making sure that we are identifying and implementing best practices in our personnel actions relative to those key personnel activities, recruitment, promotion, and retention, which is demonstrated in separations. And that includes engaging with the Equity Advisory Committee, equity change teams within the council, equity champions and professionals throughout the organization. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of what we looked like over that 2-year period. And it's broken down and disaggregated both by ethnicity and gender. And there are some interesting things or things that would draw your attention and warrant some conversation. I think one of the things that some people would look at is, and just for context, the blue headers are what we look like or what our representation, both by numbers and percentage. The salmon colored is the availability in the labor force in the metropolitan region, and it's broken down again by gender and ethnicity. So some might look at this and say, hey, we're red for both white women and white men. What are we not white enough? We should be hiring more white people. And I would engage in that conversation and look at this as a good sign, because we do know that we are in a region that is woefully underperforming in terms of equity. And we know that there are economic and education disparities that contribute to the determination of individuals being in the labor force in our region. So I would say that it's a good thing, and it does show a positive step towards reaching one of our goals, is being a leader, and that we aren't experiencing that level of disparities within our workforce. Again, it's also important to note that it's also important to look at the data based on those EEO codes to identify issues that rely at other levels and various levels within the structure and hierarchy. I also want to point out that this is not underutilization where you see red. Underutilization has a specific definition or regulatory compliance definition and utilizes a two-factor analysis. This is only a one-factor analysis, which is availability, external based on the census data. But it does give a good look in terms of what we look like versus the availability in the labor force. That second factor and weighted factor in a true underutilization analysis would be to weight how we fill those positions internally to get to a true underutilization. Next slide, please. This just shows by division what we look like in terms of gender. So if you recall, and from the last time we presented this, and also from Marcy's presentation, we are underutilized for women throughout all categories, levels within the agency. However, this kind of what this kind of demonstrates to me is the importance of being able to break down, disaggregate the data by division, and in some cases by departments within that division, because not everybody is going to be experiencing that. And as you see, Metro Transit heavily influences the numbers relative to our overall and what we look like overall, because they represent over 3,000 employees of the 4,300. And also, if you look at community development as a division, they have more women than men. So the issue that is facing us in terms of underutilization for women as an organization as a whole is not an issue for community development as a division. Next slide, please. In terms of promotions, again, just broken down by ethnicity, as you can see, in terms of promotions, heavily white, 85%, and all other groups are being promoted at a rate less than their representation in our organization, and white folks at a rate greater than their representation in our organization. Next slide, please. As well, as part of our affirmative action plan, we know that retention has to be a key focus of our strategies, corrective actions, and best practices, because people of color and women are leaving our organization at a rate higher than their representation in our organization. And so, again, with all of these numbers and statistics, I think the important thing is that we can all draw conclusions, but it's important that we can start the conversation and have the data to have good conversations and dig into the questions of why are we seeing this, what can we do, and what are the best practices. So it's the beginning of the conversation, and I think that's the important thing, and to be able to sit down with each division and where it's appropriate, departments, to have specific conversations and develop specific strategies to address what we're seeing. Next slide, please. So the last part of this, or one of the most important parts of this, is how do we, uh, how can we be transparent about both where we are, where we're going, and what our goals are, and making sure that we can establish good dashboard data. Some of the slides and graphics that we've shown are those that are being recommended for dashboard data. Of course, it's important that the data is disaggregated and that we do not lump everyone into people of color or these broad categories, because that prevents us from getting at specific issues that may exist. And it's important, as I pointed out, to be division specific and also in some cases department specific, and then share that relevant detail with each of those division leaders. Again, equity champions and professionals and decision makers. And our plan is to report and publish this data and our progress towards our affirmative action goals quarterly. Our first quarter for 2021 data will be available April 30th. There is some lag time, about 28 to 30 days in terms of being able to report it once complete. But that first quarter data should be ready for us to review and then publish. And then the ability to pivot and make adjustments where we need to, both in terms of our strategies, best practices, and where we want to head and where we want to, the outcomes we want to achieve. Next slide, please. So this last part we want to discuss is just kind of talk about the work that both OEO and HR have been doing to really identify those areas, strategies, initiatives, discuss some of them, the groups that we're working with, and I'm going to turn this last part back over to Marcy. Marcy, you are on mute if you're talking.
Next slide, please. So Ashanti and I are working with our colleagues in Human Resources and OEO to put some very detailed action plans together to address the particular needs that we have by all of the OEO, the EO codes for our employees and in the divisions in which they work. Now, it's probably a spreadsheet of about 15 pages, and which is way more than you want to see here, but we thought we would just present some of the key action items that we'll be taking and have begun to take already. As you know, Ashanti and I, between the two data sets, we have some work to do to coordinate those data sets. From a historic standpoint, and then also from a strictly what are we doing in the recent past to make changes, and that those data, a lot of that data is going to be more of a lagging indicator of our success. So these are some of the things we're planning to do, and so Ashanti, if you want to add anything to any of these, please feel free to jump on in. But we do want to identify and address our retention data issues, and not just the data issues, but the issues. So we do know we need to do a deeper analysis of that separation data to pull out from the data, employees who retire. That's something that's a good thing about one's employment history with us, right? So we want to be able to take a look at that involuntary and voluntary separation and really understand where is that happening, what's the disaggregation of that data. So I think that once we have a little closer look at that, and the other thing too we want to do is improve our leaving service forms so that we have better information about why people are leaving. We also will be redoing our engagement survey this year in 2020. And we are working on strategies to get more exit surveys completed by employees who leave. And then we also want to be doing a more proactive activity, which is to do stay interviews, is to provide a tool for managers to be checking in with their employees who are still here to kind of understand how they're doing and what they're thinking about their careers. From a recruitment standpoint, we are working in human resources to improve our candidate sourcing. And one very interesting idea that we have is to put together a recruitment scorecard to actually evaluate every recruitment, every open requisition, and what the hiring manager and the HR person did together to build and support equity at every stage of that recruitment. So we'll begin to see how are we actually implementing the steps, the actions that help us to get a diverse candidate hired in the end. Other things that we're looking at is hiring outreach, recruitment and internships for people with various abilities. And for example, our talent management group is partnering with Guthrie Baird to look at an internship program that would be geared towards people with differing abilities. We've got some other ideas there as well. Employee resource groups are important, I think, for us as an organization to help people feel supported, to connect with them, for them to people to connect with each other in various ways. Like right now we have a Pride ERG and an Advancing Women in Transit ERG, and both our offices are actively supporting and those efforts. An important piece for this year in 2020 is our racial equity training initiative, which by the time we're done at the end of the year, will have touched every employee here at the council. And it has begun with supervisors and management, with the IDI and the intercultural conflict. There's going to be a leadership forum this summer. We launched unconscious bias training for all employees here, web-based training last month. And then there will be training rolled out for all employees later in the year. Several ways that we're supporting career development here, and especially to impact the promotions of people of color in our organization is the Mentoring Works program. And then we have several workforce development projects that we're doing now in conjunction with partners around the council to build pathways into work here at the council. And I know you've heard about some of those, like the mass transit technician program. We have some other really interesting ones that we're beginning this year as well. And then finally, we have some dashboards and reporting that we are working on. Ashanti talked about transparency and the ability for people to have access to the information about our workforce, about our outcomes in terms of separation and in terms of promotions. And so we are actively working a project that we hope to actually have some of our workforce dashboards up and able to be viewed in June of this year. So it's going to take us, probably most of the year to get all of our dashboards around equity completed. But the ones around the workforce will be done sooner than later. I know, Ashanti, is there anything else you'd like to add to some of these items?
No, I think you did a good job, Marcy. The one thing I will say too, just in terms of our separations, I think, yes, retirement is a good thing. And I think it's also a good indicator that if the pool of individuals that are retiring is more diverse, then that's a good sign that we're also relative to retention, and that people of color and women are also staying long enough to retire. So I just wanted to point that out too as something that's both relative to our retention efforts and something that we want to monitor.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, in that I think I'm very excited about the dashboards that we'll be creating, because they're really going to give all of us more access to disaggregated data points. Right now, it's such a manual process, and it can be difficult to get at particular points that you really want to dig into. And so I'm very excited about this, and I think you'll be too, to see, you know, the kind of information we'll have at our fingertips, and then therefore the ability to measure progress in any of our initiatives. So with that, we'll take any questions.
So we have time probably for one question or so, and then we have to move on. Does anybody have a question? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. So I just had a question about the one thing I would like to see possibly around the separation data, as we've heard anecdotally that we've had some of our employees take COVID leave and then not return. And I would be really interested to see what that separation data looks like and have that data disaggregated too, to see if it's disproportionate in any way. I think that could be really reflective. And even as we start to rebuilding back some of our workforce as more and more transit comes online, we can make sure that we're keeping that in consideration as we're building that workforce back.
Great.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question if somebody has a question. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. Is there a way that we can see disaggregated data around, rather than just department, but around income bands, so that we can see, you know, the amount of money people are making based on disaggregated data around race and gender? That to me is interesting, the power of wealth building and, you know, where people are at. And secondly, will this presentation be given to the Equity Advisory Committee? I just started my role and had my first meeting last night as the liaison to this group, and they were talking about this very thing. So whenever we have information around employment, and I'm also going to take a look at it when it comes to investing in women owned firms through our investments and BIPOC, I want to get that to that group as well. So I know it's important that we tap into them when we need their input, but I think they would, if we haven't given them this type of information, they would greatly appreciate it if that would be okay.
Great.
Mr. Chair, council member, I know that about 3 years ago, I presented some of this data to the EAC, and I know Shanti and I talked about we probably would be doing this presentation, so we'll take an invitation and we'll bring it over.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, you are so invited. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marcy and Ashanti. We are going to table business item 2021-101 until our next meeting. So, Councilmember Johnson, do you have a motion?
I do, Mr. Chair. I move to close this meeting under section 13D.03 subdivision 1 of the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, so we can consider a confidential setting labor developments and negotiations related to labor strategies. And Mr. Chair, I could make it a joint motion for the next item as well. Okay, and Mr. Chair, as part of that motion, I'd also move that this meeting be closed to the public pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05 Subdivision 3B and applicable case law, so that the committee can discuss with our legal counsel in a confidential setting attorney-client privilege matters. And this then would account for items 3 and 4 on our agenda today.
Okay, and is there a second to that motion?
Second by Barber.
Seconded by Barber. So just as a discussion, this is as a public body, a majority vote of in a public meeting may decide to hold a closed meeting under the provisions of section 13D-03 subdivision 1B of the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. Discussions during this portion of the closed meeting must be confined to labor negotiation strategies developed and/or discussions and review of the labor proposal. Proceedings of this portion of the closed meeting will be recorded, preserved for 2 years after contracts are signed and made available to the public. The portion of the meeting that is for the purposes of discussing legal matters is also closed under open meeting laws section 13D-05 subdivision 3B to discuss attorney-client privilege matters. Discussing these litigation matters in a confidential setting will permit the council to engage in candid discussions and resolve these matters in a way that benefits the council and the public. Discussions during the closed portion, portion of the closed portion of the meeting will be confined to pending legal litigation matters listed in the committee agenda. So with that, is there any other discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye. Thank you. Before we close the meeting to discuss labor strategies and pending litigation, I'd like to inform the members of the public who are monitoring this meeting for the record that the committee will adjourn immediately after the discussion of these two information items, and that the committee will not have any discussions or conduct any business after these two information items have been completed. For the record, please note that this meeting was closed as of
Mr. Chair, point of order.
3. Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We were going to bring back an item previously with more information coming from staff on the emergency order. And that was going to become part of
Yeah,
late.
we're going to table that to our next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So for the record, please note that the meeting was closed to the public at 3:04 p.m. on April 28th, 2021.